It began with someone asking me if I'd ever hear from her again. It was an innocent question, a quiet moment during a lunch break, sitting under a rusted patio umbrella outside a small diner in Cross Hollow. My coworker, Nathaniel, had just gone through a breakup, and he was rambling about closure. I was barely listening until he looked at me and said, "Do you ever think she'll reach out?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because I knew too well. For years, I built my life like a puzzle without the piece that used to be Rhino. I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. Tired of remembering how things fell apart. Tired of explaining to people that no, we didn't keep in touch. Tired of pretending that her name didn't still echo somewhere inside me when everything else went quiet. I went home that evening and didn't give it much thought. The day faded like all the others, the same kettle boiling, the same sunset melting behind the trees, the same worn slippers at the foot of the couch. Nothing changed. Nothing ever did. Until the following morning. I was sorting through old boxes in the attic, looking for something I'd probably thrown out years ago, when I found a yellowed envelope with her handwriting on it. My name, Ellis, written in soft pencil, barely faded after all this time. It wasn't the message that shocked me. It was the timing. Because at that exact moment, while holding that envelope, my phone buzzed. Rhinell Winslow. I hadn't seen that name on a screen since 2010. I didn't open the message at first. I sat in the attic for what felt like an hour, just holding the phone and staring at her name. Something about it felt unreal. Like I was watching a memory from someone else's life. 15 years ago, she had walked out of our shared apartment wearing a blue sweater and sunglasses, holding a suitcase that I didn't help her pack. She left behind her plants, her books, a half-drunk mug of tea on the table, and me. She didn't slam the door. She didn't cry. She didn't explain much. She just said, "Please don't try to follow me." And then she was gone. What I discovered months later would carve a hollow place inside me that no apology could ever reach, that her departure wasn't about finding herself, like she said. It was about someone else. Someone married. Someone who promised her a life full of risks and adventure, and probably better wine. But that was 15 years ago. And now, there she was again, not on my porch, not in a dream, but in a single unread message that just said, "I don't expect anything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." No punctuation. Just those words. I didn't open it again that night. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat outside in the dark for hours, listening to the sound of wind through the trees, feeling something stir in me that I had buried so carefully. I wasn't sure if it was anger, or sadness, or something far more dangerous. Hope. I didn't write back. Not the next day. Not the day after that. For the first time in years, I didn't know what I felt, and that terrified me more than anger ever did. The thing is, when someone disappears without truly looking back, you don't just lose them. You lose pieces of yourself. The version of me that laughed easily, that made coffee for two, that thought weekends were for dreaming instead of recovering, he left when she did. For years, I convinced myself that was okay. But when Rhinell reached out again, 5 days later, this time with just one sentence, my chest felt tight in a way I hadn't known since the early days. "Ellis, I'm in town." No apology this time. No preamble. Just presence. I hadn't known she moved away. I'd never asked. I guess I assumed she vanished with him, the man with the good posture and easy words, the one who wore tailored coats and whispered promises into her ear at gallery events I never liked attending. I met him once. I wasn't supposed to. I had gone to return her father's old watch, something she'd forgotten in a drawer when she left. I didn't want her to think I'd kept it out of spite. I still remember the address she'd scribbled for me. I found it in an unfamiliar part of the city. Tall buildings. Bright lights. Music drifting from second-floor balconies. She answered the door, wearing his shirt. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, she looked like she might faint. But she didn't say a word. She stepped back, let me hand her the watch, and nodded. That was it. Then he appeared behind her. I don't remember what he looked like. I only remember the way he touched her arm as if she already belonged to him. That was the moment something inside me broke quietly. No rage. No explosion. Just the slow realization that I wasn't going to be chosen. She never explained anything after that. And I didn't ask. And now she was here again. In the same town. Breathing the same air. I should have ignored her. I should have blocked the number and gone back to pruning the hedges and reading paperbacks. But curiosity has its own kind of cruelty. It doesn't scream. It whispers. I typed. Why? No. Hi. No. How long? Just that single word. one I had carried with me longer than I cared to admit. Her reply came only a few minutes later. I've been trying to find the courage to answer that for 15 years. I stared at the screen like it might catch fire. Part of me wanted to laugh. Courage? She had courage enough to leave. Courage enough to follow someone into a life that didn't include me. But now she wanted me to believe this was bravery? And yet, I couldn't deny it. Something inside me wanted to hear her out. I sat down at the kitchen table. That same rickety one we bought at a flea market the year after we got married. I'd kept it all these years. Not because of her, or so I told myself, but because it was sturdy and nothing else ever seemed to fit the space. Funny how the things you keep try to remind you of what you've lost. I wrote back. You have 5 minutes. Public place. Daylight. I picked the time. I half expected her to disappear again, but the reply came instantly. I'll be there. And with that, 15 years of silence were about to be broken, not by shouting, not by accusations, but by two people sitting across from each other, unsure whether the most painful chapter of their story had ended or just begun. The cafe I chose was mostly empty, not by accident. It sat 2 blocks off Main Street, tucked between a forgotten bookshop and a closed-down tailor's. The kind of place with chipped floor tiles and a chalkboard menu that hadn't been updated in months. It wasn't modern. It wasn't pretty. But it was neutral. And I needed neutral. I arrived 20 minutes early, though I told her to be on time. I didn't want to walk in second. I didn't want the door to open behind me, my body jerking with every creak like it might be her. I needed a moment to study the room first, to breathe it in, to make space for whatever this was going to be. I sat by the window, facing outward, my reflection faint in the glass, washed out by morning light. I didn't recognize the man looking back. My hair was mostly gray now, my jaw tighter, my eyes more tired than I remembered ever allowing. I hadn't worn cologne in years. I nearly did that morning. Habit, I guess. I stopped myself. She didn't deserve the past version of me. 10 minutes passed. Then 5. Then 1. The door opened, a small bell chimed overhead, and for a moment, nothing happened. I didn't turn. I waited. I felt her presence before I saw her. Strange how that works. She walked slowly. No perfume. No dramatic entrance. She wore a loose beige sweater, jeans, and those same quiet shoes she used to wear when she'd sneak out to read at night and not wake me. Her hair was pulled back, but not tightly, like she hadn't known what to do with it. She didn't smile. Neither did I. She sat down across from me. Not too close. Not too far. Her hands folded on the table like she'd practiced this moment 1,000 times and still wasn't ready. The first thing I noticed? Her eyes weren't proud. They weren't sad, either. They were searching. Thank you, she said, almost a whisper, for showing up. I nodded once. Not as forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was loud, but not awkward. The kind of silence that gathers weight with every second, like a storm deciding whether or not to break. She looked out the window briefly, then back at me. I don't know how to start, she said, her voice more gravel than I remembered. You probably have every right to leave. Right now. Or tell me not to speak. I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted from her either. Closure? Revenge? Understanding? Or maybe, just confirmation that she had, in fact, once been real. I won't interrupt you, I said. But don't expect anything in return. Not today. She nodded. She didn't flinch. Her hands, however, gripped each other tightly, a quiet war happening between her fingers. I thought I loved him, she began. Back then. I really did. And I told myself I left because I was chasing something more. Something freer. Something wild. But that was a lie I kept feeding because it was easier than facing what I'd broken. Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. I waited years for him to leave his wife. He never did. I stayed anyway. Told myself I was strong. Independent. But I wasn't. I was ashamed. Still, I said nothing. Not out of coldness, but because I didn't trust my voice. She exhaled slowly, almost shakily. By the time I realized how badly I'd messed up, too much time had passed. And then even more time passed. And I thought, he's probably happy now. He probably forgot what my voice sounds like. My throat tightened. I hadn't. I'm not here to beg, she added. I needed to sit across from you and say that you didn't deserve the way I left. Outside, a couple walked by with a baby stroller. A bird landed on the sill. Time didn't stop for us. It just bent slightly around this moment. And still, I hadn't said a word beyond logistics. She noticed. You hate me, she said, not accusingly, just as a fact she'd learned to live with. I looked at her fully then. Not past her. Not through her. At her. No, I replied, my voice low. I did. For a long time. But hate's too heavy to carry this far. She blinked. Once. Twice. No tears. Just stillness. We sat like that for a few more minutes, two people who once shared a bed, now struggling to share air. And then she whispered, "Thank you for not walking out." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't want to, but because something inside me had already begun to shift. Not forward. Not backward. Just somewhere new. We didn't talk for 47 minutes. Yes, I counted. She stayed across from me, hands resting flat on the wooden table like she didn't trust them to move. I nursed a lukewarm coffee that I didn't remember ordering. The waitress came by twice and refilled both our cups without a word. Rhinell kept glancing at the window, like maybe the right thing to say was written in the clouds. I remember watching her breathe. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't painful. It was just the kind of quiet watching you do when you've already said goodbye but haven't left the room yet. She wasn't the woman I remembered, not entirely. Her posture had shifted. Her voice was thinner. Even the way she blinked seemed slower. But there were tiny things that hadn't changed. The way she turned her spoon exactly once before setting it down. The way she crossed her ankles without looking down. The way she held the edge of the cup with both hands, even when it was cool to the touch. Things no one else would notice. Things I thought I'd forgotten. "You don't owe me anything," she said suddenly. Not loud. Just enough to be heard over the hum of the espresso machine. I didn't respond. Not out of stubbornness, but because I didn't know where to put her words. She wasn't asking for space. She wasn't asking for closure. She was naming air, naming silence, naming the distance between us like it was a thing she could fold up and carry in her purse. I told myself, if I ever saw you again, I'd be honest. Not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. She took a small breath and looked up. But sitting here? I feel like every word I say is just decoration. Her mouth trembled after that. Only slightly. I set my cup down. I looked at her the way you look at an old photograph, one you forgot existed. The kind that stirs up a smell, or a season, or a version of yourself you can't quite believe was ever real. "You hurt me," I said quietly. "I know." You didn't look back. I couldn't. That answer struck deeper than I expected. I waited. She didn't explain. She just stared at her coffee, like the surface might show her a different version of herself. I don't know what I expected from this day. Maybe an apology dressed in old perfume. Maybe a flood of reasons, twisted logic, romantic what-ifs. But she didn't offer any of that. She only offered her presence, awkward, uncertain, unraveling. Outside, a breeze passed, and the cafe door creaked. "I think about that morning a lot," she whispered. "The day I left. I replay it in my head, but everything's quiet. Like watching a movie with the sound off. You didn't chase me." I looked at her. "No, I didn't." She nodded, accepting it like a math equation she already knew the answer to. I think that was the moment I realized how deeply I'd already lost you. The honesty in that hit harder than anything she could have planned to say. I didn't move. I didn't blink. We didn't speak again for another 10 minutes. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel cruel. It just felt real. I didn't go home after the cafe. Instead, I drove, slowly, almost without thought, until I reached the street I said I'd never return to. It looked different now, like someone had taken the memory of it and sanded down the sharp corners. Same cracked sidewalks. Same leaning oak trees with their long, reaching arms. But the house wasn't the same. Not exactly. New paint. A different car in the driveway. Someone had taken down the old wind chime, the one she bought at the county fair, back when we used to hold hands without needing a reason. I parked across the street. Left the engine running. I didn't know why I was there. Maybe to prove to myself I could be. Maybe to stand in front of the past like it was a museum exhibit. That window on the second floor, the one that used to fog up when she blow-dried her hair, was slightly cracked open. I remember how the curtain used to puff outward when the breeze came through. She always left it like that, even in winter. I don't know how long I sat there, but the air changed. It had that early evening smell, warm dust and grass. And then it happened. A child's voice, faint, distant, called out from behind the house. A girl. Laughing. Not hers. Not mine. Just part of a life that now belonged to someone else. That was the moment it hit me. Not like a punch, not like a scream, but like standing in an empty room and hearing your own voice bounce back at you. I was never coming back here. Not to stay, not to reclaim anything, because nothing I left behind was still mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room with all the lights off, the windows open just enough to let the night in. My house doesn't creak much. It's newer, smaller. The air moves quieter here. Even the shadows seem better behaved. I thought about Raynell's hands. Not her face. Not the way she hurt me. Just her hands. The way she used to turn book pages with her thumb. The way she rubbed lotion into her knuckles when she thought I wasn't watching. Her hands were always busy. Always quiet. And yet, when she left, she didn't take anything with her. No photo albums. No mugs. No favorite blanket. She just left, as if the act of disappearing required absolute stillness. I wondered what she did with her hands now. At 3:11 a.m., I opened the message thread again. She hadn't texted since the cafe. Not a single word. I hadn't either. But I kept staring at the final sentence she wrote before leaving. I don't expect you to respond, but I'm still here. Still where? Still who? That was the thing about her. She had a way of saying everything and nothing at once. A way of leaving me with echoes instead of answers. I almost wrote something back. I typed, "Do you remember the green chair in the corner?" Then deleted it. Because it wasn't about the chair. It was about how many versions of a person you can carry inside you, and how impossible it is to know which version they've kept of you. The next morning came without urgency. No message. No call. No sign that yesterday had even happened, except for the coffee receipt still in my jacket pocket. A cheap, wrinkled reminder that 15 years of silence had produced 2 paper cups and a few unfinished sentences. I didn't expect her to write again. I half hoped she wouldn't. And yet, when I checked my phone every few hours without realizing it, I knew something inside me had already shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, and it definitely wasn't longing. It was something quieter, something less noble. The ache of being remembered by someone who once tried to erase you. I spent the afternoon at the lake. Not to think, not intentionally, but because it was the one place left that didn't belong to either version of us. The sky was overcast, the water dull and flat like brushed steel. A couple sat on a bench near the dock, eating chips straight from the bag, the kind of casual closeness that used to be second nature to me and now felt like a foreign language. I kept my distance. I brought a book, but didn't open it. Instead, I watched the ripples form, watched them widen and vanish, watched a family of ducks float through like nothing could touch them. Somewhere between the stillness and the gray water, I realized something I hadn't been able to name at the cafe. Raynell hadn't asked me anything. She hadn't asked how I was. She didn't ask if I'd moved on, if I'd married, if I ever thought of her. She hadn't asked if I hated her. She just told her version of the story and left the rest unsaid. And that silence, that deliberate avoidance of curiosity, made me wonder what she was afraid to hear. I couldn't stop circling that thought. What didn't she want to know? Later that evening, I found myself standing in front of the hallway closet, staring at a dusty box I hadn't touched in years. It had no label, but I knew what was inside. I pulled it out, sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, and opened it like I was defusing something fragile. Old Polaroids. A birthday card I never gave her. A postcard we bought on our honeymoon and never mailed. I didn't cry. That part of me. The man who wept for her in the early months after she left. He was long gone. What hit me wasn't sorrow. It was distance. Not just physical, but emotional. Like I was looking at someone else's keepsakes and trying to understand the story without subtitles. One photograph stopped me. It was from a quiet Sunday. I was on the porch with our old dog, Jasper, barefoot and smiling, eyes closed as she snapped the picture without warning. My hair was longer then. I had a small scar on my temple from trying to hang a wind chime she insisted we buy. That photo caught me mid-laugh. What struck me most wasn't the happiness. It was the trust. I looked like someone who believed in the world, who hadn't yet learned how quickly something beautiful could be abandoned without explanation. I put the photo back in the box, closed it slowly, and placed it on the top shelf, not out of nostalgia, but because I finally understood something. Raynell hadn't come back for closure. She came back because something in her life had broken again, and she wanted to touch the last place that had ever felt whole. I wasn't that place anymore. And maybe, deep down, she already knew that. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I sat down at my kitchen table with a pen and paper, no keyboard, no screens, and I began to write to her. Not to send, not to share, but to write, raw and unedited, as a man documenting the emotional distance between who he was and who he became. I didn't start with dear. I didn't end with my name. I just wrote thoughts, fragmented, unsteady, drifting between memory and clarity. I wrote about the silence, about the way the air shifted when she walked into that cafe, about the hollow in my chest that didn't ache anymore but sometimes hummed. And in the middle of the page, I wrote something that surprised me. I no longer miss you. I just miss the man I used to be when you loved me. I sat with that sentence for a long time. I didn't cross it out. The door was heavier than I remembered. The kind that sticks a little near the bottom, as if the house itself was reluctant to let anyone in. I pushed through anyway, holding the key just a second longer than needed, like letting go of it meant stepping into something I hadn't agreed to. Rhinell wasn't there yet. It was her idea, this meeting. Not a public place this time. She said she had something to show me, something she didn't want to explain through a screen or over coffee cups. I hesitated when she asked. I told myself I wouldn't. I told myself the cafe was the only time. But curiosity is patient. It waits in corners and under words like no pressure and just if you feel like it. The apartment she was renting was on the third floor of a quiet building that overlooked the edge of town. No traffic noise. Just trees, rooftops, and the occasional train humming past in the distance. It was the kind of place people pass through, not settle into temporary by design. I walked in, alone, because she'd left the door unlocked. Inside, it smelled faintly of cinnamon and something older, not quite dust, not quite memory, but something that hinted at both. There were no photos on the walls. No books on the shelves. A single jacket draped over a chair. 2 mugs on the counter, clean and upside down. She'd cleared the space, either out of politeness or nerves, I couldn't tell. There was a journal sitting on the table, closed. A small yellow flower pressed between its pages, not for decoration, but to mark something. The edges of the journal were soft, like it had been carried too often and opened too much. Part of me wanted to touch it. The rest of me felt like that would cross a line I hadn't agreed to. I sat on the edge of the couch, upright. Nothing about this felt comfortable, even though it wasn't hostile. The walls didn't close in. The air didn't buzz. But it was still the kind of room where every sound felt like a decision. 20 minutes passed. When the door finally opened, I didn't look up right away. She entered quietly, carrying a bag with both hands. No makeup. No jewelry. Her sleeves were pushed up past her elbows, and her eyes met mine as though she'd been watching me before she even stepped inside. She didn't speak at first. She set the bag down gently, then pulled something from it, an envelope. Unsealed. Thick. I didn't know if I'd ever give this to you, she said, finally. I wrote it 8 years ago. Then I rewrote it last year. And again last month. She placed the envelope on the table between us and sat down across from me, not on the couch, but in a separate chair. Not angled toward me. Not away. Just parallel. I didn't send it because I thought it would be selfish, she added. I still think that. I didn't touch it. She didn't push. We sat like that, not opposite, but not aligned, in a room filled with everything she didn't say. And it hit me, slowly and without warning, that this woman in front of me wasn't trying to fix anything. She wasn't trying to be forgiven. She wasn't even trying to be understood. She was just trying to be seen, maybe for the first time since she made the decision that fractured everything. I looked at the envelope again. I didn't open it. Instead, I asked something I never thought I would. Do you regret leaving? Her response wasn't quick. She exhaled, once, then tilted her head slightly to the side like she was listening to something far away, not my voice, but maybe her own from years ago. No, she said softly, but I regret how easily I convinced myself I had to. And somehow, that answer, bare, unguarded, without performance, felt heavier than anything else she could have said. I didn't nod. I didn't react. The envelope stayed on the table between us, untouched. But for the first time in 15 years, I realized, maybe understanding doesn't come from explanations, maybe it comes from presence. And despite everything she had broken, she was here. And so was I. We didn't speak for a long time after that. The envelope stayed on the table between us, like a symbol we both understood but didn't need to open to believe. Rhinell didn't try to fill the silence, and I didn't try to break it. There was no tension, no urgency, just something oddly calming about being in the same room again, this time without performance, expectation, or pain crowding every breath. Eventually, she stood, poured water into a kettle, and lit the stove. The soft hiss of gas, the click of the flame, they filled the room gently. She didn't ask me how I'd been. She didn't try to explain the years we'd lost. I think we both realized we weren't here to rewind anything. She placed 2 mugs on the table, didn't ask how I liked my tea, and somehow, she still got it right. We drank quietly. It's strange how comfort can return in ways you don't expect, not by rebuilding what was broken, but by recognizing what never needed fixing in the first place. We had both changed, and yet something essential remained. Maybe it was the rhythm of being near someone who once knew the inside of your life. Not your surface. Your center. When I finally picked up the envelope, I didn't open it. I looked at her and said, "Not yet." She smiled, small and real. "That's okay." I asked if she still went walking in the early morning like she used to, back when she couldn't sleep and the world felt too loud. She said yes. Every Tuesday. Sometimes Thursday. She pointed to the trail behind the building, the one that wound through the trees and led to a tiny clearing most people didn't know existed. I nodded. "Maybe I'll join you next time." She didn't respond right away. She just looked at me like she was seeing something she hadn't thought she'd ever see again. Not the past, not the pain, but the possibility of something different. Not new love. Not second chances. Just peace. That night, I drove home with the windows down. The air was cool, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't sting. I didn't think about the years we lost. I didn't replay what could have been said or done. I just listened to the quiet of the road, the soft hum of tires against pavement, and I let it be enough. I placed the envelope on my bookshelf, next to a few others I'd kept over the years, letters from my father, notes from friends, postcards from places I've never been. I didn't need to open it to know that something had changed. And I smiled, not because I had answers, but because I no longer needed them.